Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's class, which is a Winsor & Newton Introductory to Watercolor class. My name is Tim DePack, and I'm from Winsor & Newton, and I'll be your class and chat room moderator for today. I'm being joined by artist Mandy Peltier, who will be your instructor for today's class. And in this class, Mandy will cover the ins and outs of the watercolors by explaining and demonstrating different watercolor brushes, explaining the differences between watercolor papers, watercolor paints, and how to use various watercolor mediums, framing, and more. This workshop is great for those who are just starting to get used to using watercolors, or for those who would like a refresher course to improve their skills and knowledge of painting with watercolors. As part of this workshop, Mandy will also be guiding you through step-by-steps to create a beautiful black-eyed Susan piece of art. She'll be using the Cotman Sketcher box set by Winsor & Newton, and she'll bring this botanical to life. There was a sketch outline for this class beforehand, and we will put that link in the chat for those of you who did not download that yet. And upon completion of this class, you'll be sent an email survey. Please let us know what you thought about the class, how we did, and if there's any particular topics you'd like to see Mandy perform in our future classes. And as Felicia said, the class will be replayed 24 hours from now on Michaels.com or the Michaels YouTube channel. So please feel free to paint along with Mandy or sit back and relax and enjoy the class. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Mandy.
All right, thanks, Tim. Oh, he pretty much covered it all. So that was a good introduction. I'm happy to be here with you all, and we have a lot to squeeze on today because this is a class that is atypical for my normal classes. It's going to be, I've just kind of coined it Watercolor 101. So you'll just learn the basics of watercolor and the differences between paper and watercolor tubes, watercolor half pans, the different types of watercolor brushes you can use, and more. So I'll go ahead and share my other camera. My overhead view looks a little bit different than normal because my game plan today is just sort of go through the different things on this table and then clear them off the table as I go. And then we'll be able to do this project together of these black-eyed Susan stems. So there's sort of a method to the madness today. So I'm going to begin by talking about watercolor paint, as in the difference between watercolor tubes and watercolor half pans. So this is the Sketchers pocket set that I use in the majority of my classes. It looks like this, albeit clean once it's open. So I'll move this off camera here. And watercolor tubes I have used in one of my classes. I taught a Christmas class last year at Moose Lodge, and I used a green and a black tube of watercolor paint for that class. But you can buy the watercolor tubes from Michaels in two different sizes. If you buy them open stock, so what I mean by open stock is individual colors. It comes in an 8 milliliter size container, but Michaels also sells these sets, which I think is a bit more economical. And the tube size in the sets are 5 milliliters. And really watercolor tubes go a long way. A little bit goes a very long way. So I would recommend just starting off with one of these sets that come with a lot of different colors. So let me talk about the difference between watercolor tubes and watercolor half pans. I'm going to start with the tubes. So the tubes have a concentrated amount of pigment in them. You might notice they seem a lot vibrant and brighter. And they also have a greater amount of binder because the paint is already wet inside of the tube. When you squeeze it out, it's already wet. So the binder could be glycerin, gum arabic. Each company has its own blend of binder or ingredient formulation of binder that's generally not public knowledge, or at least the ratio of binders used. So it has a greater amount of binder than half pans. And what watercolor tubes are good for? They are great for mixing a large amount of color because you basically just squeeze out the amount of paint you need, and then you just add enough water to it to make it the right consistency. And you can just start painting with really, really vibrant, bold shades of color. I already mentioned they're very pigmented and vibrant. And I also think they keep brushes nicer looking than watercolor half pans because you don't have to scrub to pull the color from the half pan like you do with watercolors that come in half pans. And I'm going to talk about that in a second when I talk more specifically about half pans. So I do think your brushes tend to stay a bit nicer with tubes of paint. I do think they're less portable because if you were to go and travel with these, or maybe go to the lake and do some on plein air painting, you'll have to choose the tubes you want, find storage for them. The setup takes a little bit longer. And so I would say that's one negative. I also think tubes lead to more wasted paint because it can be hard to judge how much paint to squeeze out of the tube. And so you're probably going to be more than likely to squeeze out more than you need and more than you're actually going to use. or you'll have to add so much water to it to get to the right consistency that you may fill up almost your entire well if you're using wells to mix your paint. And another negative is the paint can sometimes dry if you don't screw on the cap all the way, or if you're not careful, paint can get on this part of the tube, and then when you screw the cap on, it can adhere or glue itself to the cap. So there's been a number of times I've had to use a screwdriver to unscrew the cap, and not just with watercolor paint. Oil paint is probably the worst offender of that. If you don't use oil paints very often, generally, or it often happens that the cap kind of glues to the tubes. So that can be an issue. So just know that. And one other thing about tubes is some people will, if they mix too much paint, they'll just let it dry on their palette and then re-wet it another time. And you can do that. But because the binder ratio is different with this, and half pans are meant to be wetted and then dried and wetted and then dried, it may not reactivate quite the same as what it was when you first mixed the tube out of the paint. So you just need to know that going in. So that's watercolor tubes. I hope that was a good fire hose introduction. And now I'll talk about half pans. And I've already talked about half pans a little bit. So half pans have a little bit less binder than tubes because they are in dry cake form. They are more portable. The Sketchers pocket set I use is meant to be portable. It's meant to take with you to do on plein air or just to paint as you go. You can use the lid as your palette, and it's compact, so it's easier to set up. I think there's less wasted paint when you're using half pans because you can just mix what you need. And one thing though that I would say is a negative about half pans is you're more likely to destroy your brushes. I had mentioned the whole scrubbing your brush thing to pull paint from the tube. You can see this brush is really well loved. It's bent. Some of the individual bristles are curvy or stick out from the rest of the bristles. And that's from using this to mix color. But I only use this brush now to mix color. So that's the solution to that problem, is just dedicate your older brushes to mixing your paint colors and then use your nicer brushes for actual painting. So it's a pretty easy negative to work around. And I've used this brush for most of the classes I've taught for mixing my paint colors. Another negative about half pans is the surface of the half pans can be contaminated by other colors. I left the white looking like it does, so you can see what I mean. So this is supposed to be white, but there's a lot of, looks like yellow ochre and burnt sienna mixed together on top of this. And so if I were wanting to lighten a color with white, I would not want to do it with this brown on top, or the brown will somewhat darken the color I'm trying to lighten. So it is important that you clean off the surface of your half pans if other color dries on top. And it's really easy to do that. You can just take a wet brush and run it over the color that needs cleaned, stick it in your water to rinse it, and just repeat that process until that half pan is clean. So it doesn't take long, and then it will prevent you from contaminating other colors. All right, so I think that pretty much covers it for half pans. It's probably not a surprise that I personally prefer half pans, but that's just my preference. You may prefer tubes, and that's fine. We all kind of have our preference. You just kind of have to try both and get a feel for which one you like best. And I also think they both have a role to play. It kind of depends on how much paint you need to mix. If you want something that even looks a bit more opaque, that's going to be easier to do with watercolor tubes. I mean, watercolor is a transparent medium, but watercolor tubes are so pigmented that you can mix them with so little water that they're still fluid and you can paint with them, but they look a little more opaque. So it just kind of depends what you need to use them for, and then you can kind of determine which one you want to use. But in general, overall, I prefer half pans. All right.
Mandy, I have one question that someone brought up that is interesting, actually. Between painting with the tubes and the half pans, is there a plus or minus? Like if you want to paint with some colors half pans and some with directly with the tubes?
They're intermixable, or they're interusable, so that wouldn't be a problem. If you have like a large wash on the background that you want to do, maybe like a blue sky, it would make sense to just quickly mix up blue from a tube, a large amount, and use that on the sky. And then if you wanted to, you could use the half pans for the main subject. That's fine. You can use them interchangeably.
Great, thank you.
Right. You're welcome. Okay, so let's move on to brushes. All right, so I'm going to just shift this up a little bit and turn this around. I've already mixed up some blue paint so I could demo for you. And I've already taken a little sheet of paper and I've written what brush I'm going to use. So I'll start with a round watercolor brush. This is a number 4. This is the size I normally use. To be honest, round brushes are 99% of the time the watercolor brush I use. It's kind of a catch-all brush. It can pretty much do everything because it comes in different sizes. It comes as low as 00, I think. And I think the largest I have is a 10, but I believe it goes up even higher than that. And the higher the number, the bigger the brush. So I love round brushes because they have a wider bristle barrel towards the bottom here. And then they come to a point at the top. And these Cotman brushes, they're made with synthetic fibers. And the ferrule here is nickel plated, so you shouldn't have an issue with rusting. Now the professional brushes, oh, I just have one right here. This is a quill brush, which is amazing. I'm not gonna demo it today, but this is actually synthetic sable. This one here is synthetic, I cannot speak, synthetic swirl actually. But Winsor Newton also has some professional brushes that are either synthetic sable or pure or true or real Kolinsky sable hair, which is weasel hair. So I think the Cotman watercolor brushes are excellent. I don't mind using these over the professional brushes. They do what I need them to do. So I like using the Cotman watercolor brushes, and I especially love using round brushes because they hold a lot of the water. I can make a line that's as thick as the width of the bristles, but I can also get a point with the pointed top of this brush. So that was a long introduction for a brush you probably all know already because we use it in all my classes. But for a round brush, I'll show you those 2 lines. You get by pressing down on your bristles, you can get a line that's as thick as the bristles themselves. Or if I ease up on my pressure and just use the tip, I can get a thinner line. Or you can kind of go in between and use the tip of the brush and then press down, and then use the tip of the brush and press down, tip of the brush, press down. And these would be good exercises if you're new at watercolor, just to kind of learn control of your brushes. And you can even practice doing curved lines if you wanted to get into lettering, where you do a thicker line for downstrokes and then use the tip for a thinner line for upstrokes. Those could be things you could practice. But like I said, round brushes are by far my favorite, my go-to, the one I use most often. All right, so next is a mop brush. You can see of all the brushes I have on my table, this is the biggest. Mop brushes have a pretty thick amount of bristles on the brush. The top does not come to a point, it's slightly rounded, and it holds a lot of water. So you could use this for loose brush work. I will generally just use a 10 round for that, or not to plug this again, but this quill brush. This is really nice for loose work. But you could use the mop brush for loose work, but it's going to be a little bit harder to get detailed lines because it's a rounded point, not a sharp point. So if I were to use a mop brush, I would mostly just use it to quickly cover the background. So for washes, so I'll show you what I mean, how quickly I can cover this little section here. Look how quick that was. So it covers the paper very quickly. So this would be really good for washes, a lot quicker than using that number 4 wash. And it'll also create a more even wash because you can cover the paper so quickly that you're not going to have some areas drying before you get to other areas. So that's where I would say a mop brush comes in handy. All right, moving on because I don't want to take too long on this. Next is a 1-stroke brush. Sometimes it's called a flat brush, depending on what brand you're working with. So you can see it's just a perfect square, sharp edges. And so with the sharp edges, you can get very sharp, crisp lines. I'll show you what I mean. Like that, very sharp, crisp lines. You can even use the very top of the brush to get straight lines. This is another, honestly, I use this one more for washes than I use the mop brush. So all the other brushes I'm demoing today, this is the other one I use besides round brushes are 1-stroke brushes. And I just pretty much use them for washes. Or if I'm making like a flower piece and I want a really distinct stem, I may not use one that's this big, but you can do, stems that are more distinct looking because of the straight angles of the brush. So that is a 1-stroke brush or flat brush. Next is angled. So funny enough, I use angled fairly frequently when I'm working with acrylic or oil, but I don't use them for watercolor, but they do make them for watercolor. So you can use them for that. One thing I think angled brushes are really good for is getting straight lines, because you can just use the tip of the brush, and I'll show you how easy it is to get straight lines and they're even. Look at that. It's so easy. It's easier than with a round brush where you have to be really careful and controlled so that you don't use the longer part of the bristles. With the straight brush, you're just using the tip, so it's really easy. But there are some techniques where you can use an angled brush to make a leaf with, where you kind of press and then lift. So I'm kind of starting with the tip, the longer part of the tip, facing north and kind of pressing down, and then kind of moving it in a diagonal direction down. There's even tutorials for flowers where you just use the angled brush all around, and it creates kind of a cool effect, but I don't generally use angled brushes with watercolor, but that's how you can use them. They're great for straight lines, broad strokes, crisp hard edges. All right, and then a fan brush. This one is fun. It's kind of a one-trick pony. If you've watched Bob Ross, he used them on trees to make like limbs and leaves on trees. I think it's really nice to use for grass. So if I were to use a fan brush for watercolor, I would start with the brush actually dry so I get the distinct bristles. So it's dry right now. I haven't wetted it like I did all the other brushes. I'm just gonna stick it in a little bit of this blue, and I'll show you what I mean by grass. So I'm just going to take it and I'm just going to sort of move it side to side, left and right. And doesn't that look like grass? So this would be really cool for a landscape painting. We did grass on a bicycle class I taught recently, but we just used the round brush for it. But I think the fan brush creates really quick, fun grass that has a lot of movement to it. So that's one thing you could do. Or you could do the tree limbs where you just sort of kind of move it up and down to add paint to tree limbs. This is sort of the technique you use for that. So fan brushes are really good for texture and detail work like grass and trees. All right, so those are the brushes. We're doing good here. Let's move on. I'm going to talk about watercolor paper now. So let me move the paper down. So I have here 2 pads of paper. I have the student grade Winsor & Newton classic watercolor paper. And I also have the block form, and I'll explain what a block form is, of the Winsor & Newton professional watercolor paper. I have used both of these in my classes, but I more than often use the professional paper. All right, so let me first talk about the similarities between these 2 papers. Both the classic paper or student grade paper and the professional paper, they're both the same weight. They're both 140 pounds, which is medium weight for watercolor paper. You can find 90 pounds, which would be light, and you can find heavier than 140, which would be considered heavyweight watercolor paper. So both of these come in the same weight, 140 pounds. They're both acid-free, and they're both made with cotton, but the professional paper is made with 100% cotton. And so 100% cotton is going to give you the strongest paper, the most pliable paper, the best option for smooth transition of color. And it also gives you more brilliant and vibrant colors because cotton just lends itself to that effect, which is why I use it. It also can take the most abuse with the brush and the highest number of layers. The classic watercolor paper, let me first say that a lot of student grade watercolor paper is just made with 100% cellulose fibers and particles. If you don't know what cellulose fibers and particles are, it's bark, wood, leaves, and any other materials from plants. The good news about the Winsor & Newton classic watercolor paper is that it is made with 25% cotton, and then the other 75% is wood pulp. So it's not just any cellulose fiber, it's wood pulp. So this does make it a nicer student grade paper than what you'll typically find. And the 25% cotton will allow it to perform in some ways like the professional paper, but I just really prefer the 100% cotton because it really does what I need the paper to do. And I always tell students, with watercolor. This isn't true for every medium, but for watercolor, if you have to choose between professional paint or professional paper, go with the professional paper. If it's a money issue and you can afford one but not the other, I'd get the student grade paint and get the professional paper. So you'll see a huge improvement in your work, and you'll realize you're better than you think you are once you try the professional paper. It just does such an amazing job taking the color, the transition of colors and the vibrancy. So the professional paper comes in block form, and I told you I would tell you what that means. Let me first say the classic paper comes glue bound. So you just pull off the paper. This is how most pads of watercolor paper come, is glue bound. It also comes in wire bound. I don't really use wire bound. That could be good if you're doing on plein air painting and you just want to keep all of your paintings together. Wire bound will secure them better than glue bound will. The professional paper, it does come in wire bound in the 5x7 size, but the other sizes are block form. So block form means there's only one corner, it's the upper right corner, that's loose. The rest are glued down. So what this allows is your paper won't buckle. You can paint directly on the block. And by buckle, I mean your paper's not going to fold and manipulate or become wavy. So most of the time though, I won't use it in block form. I did this week because I painted some very abstract loose sunflowers. So I was using a lot of water and a lot of paint. So I just did it directly on the block. And once it was dry, it was completely smooth, no buckling, because I kept it on the block. But if you want to lift, this is what I do. You can use a knife. A lot of artists will tell you to use a knife. If I'm being honest with you, I do a lot of shortcuts. I just take my nail and I just kind of loosen it along here. And I just gently fold along here, and then I just tear it off. And it's fun. So you can remove it the right way, or you can do the shortcut way like I do. I'm always looking for shortcuts. All right. So that is the paper, and the Black Eyed Susan today is using, or I did do it on the professional paper, but it'll still work fine if you have the student grade. But I would, just encourage you, give the professional a try. I think you'll be really amazed at how well it works.
Mandy, can you just touch on one point real quick back on the paper?
Sure.
Hot press paper, cold press paper?
Yes, thank you for that. All right.
There is rough, but I think hot and cold are the two big ones that people ask about.
Yes. Okay. So both papers I just showed you, the classic and then that professional paper, those are both cold press. So cold press paper has a very subtle texture to it, but there is some tooth, and it's middle in between rough press and hot press. So it's sort of middle of the road between those two. So actually how it's made is it is pressed between felts at the paper mill to give it some tooth. But then it's ran through a second time without the felts to make it a little less toothy, but still toothy. So cold press is kind of the standard roughness or paper that watercolor artists use. I would say it's the most popular anyways. It's the one I use most frequently. And then like Tim said, there is a rough press that is just pressed between felts at the paper mill, just like the cold press, but it's not re-ran or ran through again. It's just ran through that one time with the felts to give it a really distinctive rough surface. I actually love working on rough paper. I would say it's probably my favorite. And you can buy the professional paper in rough, not the student grade, but you can buy the professional paper in a rough surface. Hot press, however, is a total different ball of wax. It's not ran through with felt rollers. It's ran through by passing sheets through hot metal rollers. So hot press is a very smooth surface. There's virtually no tooth. I love hot press if I'm working with drawing inks or lettering, because if you paint letters on watercolor paper, you might notice the edges sort of bleed a little bit into the tooth and you don't get really hard, crisp lines. And that's because of the tooth. But if you were to do lettering with markers or watercolor on hot press paper, you'll get really crisp lines. And that's because it's almost smooth as glass and there's hardly any tooth. So it's really good for detail work. Does that answer the question, Tim? Thank you for keeping me honest.
Yes, that's it.
All right. So moving on to masking fluid. I have only used one of these in my classes, and that's the middle one here, the art masking fluid that has a slight yellow tint. But Winsor & Newton does sell a couple of other masking fluids. They sell a colorless art masking fluid, and they also sell a permanent masking fluid. Now, I have already put the masking fluid on the paper here, and it's already dry. So I'll put paint over them, and then we'll remove it at the end so you can see what it does. And I'll also add a little bit of this to our Black Eyed Susans, just so you can see what it does on the artwork as well. But the colorless art masking fluid and the art masking fluid are essentially the same, other than the art masking fluid has a little bit of color in it, so you can see it better on the paper. They're both made from latex. I kind of think of them as being sort of like rubber cement. They kind of work like it. You can peel it off the paper easily. They're removable. The colorless art masking fluid is non-staining. I have never had a problem with the regular art masking fluid staining, but they do recommend you don't use it on damp or soft papers, since yellowing can be a concern. And you should remove the masking fluid as soon as you're done with your artwork and it's dry, because if you wait a long time to remove it, then it might be harder to lift or it might stain at that point. But masking fluid, no matter what kind you use, what it does is it protects the paper or the area that you're working on from receiving or absorbing paint. And I've used masking fluid in a great many number of my classes. So if you've taken any of my classes before, then you know what I mean. The permanent masking medium, it's actually called medium, not fluid, is liquid wax. So in some of my classes, some of you have asked about, well, what can I use if I don't have masking fluid? And I recommended using either a white crayon, or they also sell just clear wax crayons that are just for watercolor to serve as a resist. So you can use those, but this is just a liquid form of it that you could apply with a toothpick or a Q-tip, just for more kind of detail work. So I have the colorless masking fluid here, the art masking fluid here, the permanent masking fluid here, and I'll take a brush. And I'll get my paint out here. And I'm just going to do a stroke across each, and you'll see how, because it's latex based, both of these masking fluids are going to resist already the paint that I'm applying over it. And then here's the wax based, or the wax based one, the permanent masking medium. I put fluid here, but it's actually medium. And then we'll let those dry, and then we'll try to remove them at the end of class, and you'll see what it does. It's going to protect where the masking fluid is from receiving or absorbing any paint. So these are really great to mask off areas that you want to stay the white of the paper, or you want to add another color later and not have it be influenced or covered with the color you're using presently. All right, and with that, we are ready to proceed pretty much like a normal class. We're going to sketch the outline. Now that my table is clear, now it's looking more like a normal class. And let me talk about graphite pencils though for just a second. So in my classes, I use an HB pencil, and that is, let me turn off the light here a little bit. It's starting to get dark outside. And that is because in my first few classes, I used the pencil I wanted to use, and y'all couldn't see the graphite. It was too light. You couldn't pick it up over the camera. So I use an HB pencil now, and I have a scale I want to share with you. I'll hold this up. I hope this is helpful. So HB falls right in the middle. It's hard and black. The H stands for hard, the B stands for black, and HB pencil is a number 2 pencil as well. And if you go this way, actually, I'd flip these. I'd put H over here and B over here. But anyway, if you were to follow the B scale, the higher the number B, the more black the graphite's going to be, and the more prone to smearing it's going to be, because the graphite will be softer. So these are great for drawing graphite pictures, but I would not use these for watercolor. H hard. So the higher the number H you get, the lighter the graphite will be, and the harder the lead. I actually love using 9H for watercolor, because you can't even see the graphite lines when you're done painting, but you can still see them enough that you can see where you need to apply paint. Winsor Newton does sell an H pencil in a graphite pencil set. I think I have it right here. It looks like this, and or they sell an F. Yeah, here's the H pencil here. And they have an F, which just stands for fine point. You can sharpen it to a fine point, and then the HB that I'm using. But if you can get your hands on it, I do recommend the higher the H number, the better, because then you're done with your painting, you probably won't even have to erase your graphite lines. It might only be that which is exposed and was never covered with paint. So that's why I recommend an H pencil. So with that, let's go ahead and work on sketching our outline. So the Black Eyed Susan is a really quick project. It needed to be quick since I'm using so much of this class talking about watercolor. So I'm going to start by drawing the two stems. So I'm going to start with this one on the left that kind of curves and then goes diagonally down. So I'm going to sort of just line up my paper with this and just sort of draw it down. And then I'm going to apply another one that sort of almost looks like a weird looking X, a narrow, weird looking X. And then I'm going to start with this flower because it's front facing and maybe a little easier to visualize. So I'm going to draw that circle. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. It can be a little bendy, a little wavy. And then I'm just going to draw as many petals as I can, looking at my outline for placement and for shape of the petals, but it does not by any means need to be perfect. These are actually supposed to be imperfect looking petals so they can have some movement to them. And you can always hold this up to a window, the outline, and then put your working paper over top and use your window like a light box. Or if you have a light box, you can use a light box as well, and you can just transfer the outline that way. And then I'll go ahead and draw the side view one. So some of you may know I actually have a fairly large flower garden and I sell bouquets at the farmer's market on the weekends. And so these are actually Prairie Sunset, Rudbeckia, or Black-Eyed Susans. And I just picked them from my garden and drew them from the vase. So these are Black-Eyed Susans from my garden, I guess you could say. And I'll go ahead and do the middle of the side facing Black-Eyed Susan. And then I'll draw the petals. So Prairie Sunrise, I think it's Sunrise or Sunset. Black-Eyed Susans have a little bit orange in the petals, which I just think adds some nice color. And one thing to note about this side-facing one, these three smaller looking petals here are actually leaves. So these will be green, not yellow. And I'll have my example one next to me when we start painting to help with color placement. So it's 3 petals on top and then 3 leaves in the middle and then 3 petals on the bottom. And then we only need to draw on the leaves. You can draw on as many leaves as you want. I just have 3. So I'll start this one maybe here. And put one down here. And they're just sort of longer, thinner petals. That's sort of what they look like. And I have to say, as I was preparing for this class and practicing it, I must have made 10 of these maybe. I sold them at the farmer's market, or they've all sold. So I think if you make this and gift it, people are going to love it because they went fast at the farmer's market, I have to tell you. I don't know if it's because it's summertime and people are into flowers right now and we're entering fall and they're looking for yellow and they kind of look like sunflowers, but they were very popular. I was very happy about that. All right, so this is sketched, and usually what happens next in my classes is we mix our paint. So let's do that now. We just have 4 colors to mix today because we needed to keep this particular tutorial on the quicker side. And we are going to be using a number 6 brush to paint the Black-Eyed Susans, but I'm going to be using my number 4 brush, my wonky one, to mix my paint colors. I really just like using a number 4 for mixing my paint colors. So if you haven't taken one of my classes before, I'll walk you through how I mix my paint colors to help everyone sort of better mimic at home when I'm doing over the camera. I have us mix the colors in my class using an artist palette with wells. So I'm going to start by putting my number 4 brush in the water, giving it a swoosh. It's okay that my water is a little blue for my demoing. It's really not going to affect too much. Or at least I hope it won't, because yellow and blue do make green. So we'll see if I end up with green petals, but hopefully it'll be okay. You have clean water since you didn't do the demoing with me. And I'm going to place 3 scoops of water into 4 wells on my palette. When I say scoop of water, I'm going to bring my brush out of the water, hold it over one of the wells, sort of shake it up and down, and that's 1 scoop. And I'm going to do that 2 more times into the first well, and 3 times into the other 3 wells. So if I'm not making sense, it's 3 scoops of water into 4 wells on your palette. And I do like to do this with clean water so that the color of the water doesn't influence my paint colors. And this will also give us just something to activate the dry half pans with. All right, So the first color we're going to mix is just cadmium yellow. It's the brighter or maybe even darker of the two yellows on the top row, second from the left. And I'm going to do 6 passes with this color. What I mean by pass is I'm going to take my wet brush, I'm going to run it into that half pan for a second, stir it into those first 3 scoops of water, wipe it on the edge of that well, and that's 1 pass. And I'm going to do that 5 more times for a total of 6 passes. My goal is to have paint that is at the very least 50% opacity, but I really prefer more like 70% maybe. You still want it to be very fluid and watery, but you want it to be really vibrant and bright. So let's see, one of my scrap sheet of papers, I can show you what I mean. Just really nice and sunny bright. And then you really don't even need to rinse your brush if you don't want to, because the next color we're going to mix, we'll use cadmium yellow. We're going to mix a yellow orange now for the orange part of the petals. So in the next bowl of my palette, I'm going to do 3 passes of cadmium yellow and then 3 passes of cadmium red pale hue, which is the orangish looking color in your set. So I'm going to do half and half of each of those 3 colors, 3 of each, and it will give us a really nice yellow orange color. And I'm not going to bother rinsing my brush before I go into the cadmium orange because I know I can clean it off next time I need to use the cadmium red pale hue. And it saves a little bit of time. Creates work for me later, but for now it saves a little bit of time. So that's our yellow orange. It was just equal parts cadmium yellow and cadmium red pale hue. And we now just have 2 more colors to mix. We'll just come straight from the Sketchers Pocket set to keep it easy today. We'll mix Sap Green, which is the lighter of your 2 greens on the bottom row for our next color. And I'll just go ahead and give you a sneak peek. The 4th color we'll mix will be Burnt Umber, which is the darker brown on the bottom row. But I'll start with Sap Green, 6 passes of Sap Green into the 3rd well of my palette. So this doesn't have to be a slow process. You can probably see by now why my brush is so wonky, because I really go for it. I'm not dainty. So after you have 6 passes of Sap Green, I am going to clean and blot my brush real quick and then do 6 passes of Burnt Umber. All right, and we will just a little bit pull from the ultramarine blue in our half pan as well. That is something you can do. You can pull colors directly from the half pan. So I'll show you how to do that as well. But before we get going, I was going to show you how you could incorporate masking fluid into this piece. So I'm just going to use the one I normally use, the art masking fluid. I'm going to open it up. And because I know I'm going to paint the leaves last, I'll do it there to give it time to dry. But on my finished piece, do you see how there's negative space? You can see a little bit of the white of the paper sort of peeking through the leaves. If you have a hard time reserving little bits of surprise for negative space when you paint, you can always just manually add that in. So what you can do is I actually have a bamboo skewer here that I've just cut in half. And you can use toothpicks too. I just couldn't find a toothpick, so I'm just using this today. And just dip the tip of it into the masking fluid, and then you can just use the tip of that to apply little thin lines or little blobs on some of the paint or on some of the leaves to create a little bit of negative space, or what will be negative space when we remove the masking fluid. So I'm just doing that to the leaves, not to the petals, because I know I'll have time for this to dry before we get to painting the petals. You do want to wait for the masking fluid to dry before you apply paint over it. That is important, or you will ruin your brushes. The masking fluid will dry very hard on your brushes and will be hard to get off. So just be aware of that. You will want the masking fluid to dry before you apply paint over it. Okay, are we ready to paint? Okay, so let me bring my palette back over here. We're going to start with the centers of the sunflowers. I'll explain what I'm going to do first. Well, first I need to take my number 6 brush and just wet it because I haven't used it yet. I'm going to use my number 6 brush in brown to outline the edging of each center of the flower. And then I'm going to do what I've done in a lot of my classes where I'll place my brush with the brown on it in the water for a split second, wipe it on my rim a few times, the rim of the water glass a few times, and then fill in the middle. And then we'll make some adjustments from there. So I'm gonna put some brown on my brush. I'm gonna start with the main open facing one. And I'm going to take that brown, I'm going to place it along the edging of the center of that Black-Eyed Susan. So I'm working wet on dry right now, wet paint onto dry paper. Place my brush in the water for a split second, wipe it, wipe it, wipe it, wipe it to remove excess water. And what will now be a diluted version of brown, I'll use to fill in the rest of the middle. And I'm leaving a little bit of negative space. I'm not trying to cover everything. And that outer ring of brown that we applied will slowly merge into the diluted version. And while my brush is still wet, I'm going to take my wet brush, I'm going to wipe it over my ultramarine blue half pan a few times. And then I'm going to apply a little bit of that along the very edging in a few spots. The blue and brown will mix together to create a very dark brown or even black looking color. So that just kind of darkens up the edging just a little. And then I am going to clean my brush and blot it. And while this is all still wet, we're now working wet on wet because we're applying wet paint onto wet paper. I'm going to take a little bit of the green and I'm just going to drop that on by just touching my brush to a few spots of that center, just to create a little bit of green on top of the brown. And now we can just make any little adjustments we want. I generally like to add just a little bit more brown to the center. You can just sort of drop some of that on. If you want, you can always wipe your brush and add a little more blue to the edging if you want, or even a little bit to the center if you want. It's up to you, but this is all very wet on wet, very loose, very abstract. And then we'll repeat that same process to the side facing Black-Eyed Susan. So I will begin by doing an outline with just the brown around the entire center of the side facing Black-Eyed Susan. It's wet on dry, wet paint on dry paper. Brush in water for a split second, wipe it on the edge of my water glass, and then loosely sort of fill that in with the diluted version of brown, trying to leave a bit of negative space if you can. And then I'll wipe my wet brush over ultramarine blue a few times. Apply a little bit of what will be a very dark brown or black, just some of the edging. You could do all if you wanted. On the side facing one, I like to place them right along the middle left. Just kind of drop some on, just like we did with the green. I think it adds some nice interest. And then you can clean and blot your brush. And then this is where we just sort of make a few adjustments. I like to drop just a little bit of green throughout the center. And then if you need any more brown, you can add a little bit more brown. So that is the center of our Black-Eyed Susans. I'm sorry to move fast here. We are under a few time constraints. You can always rewatch this class if you need to see what I'm doing again, or pauses needed to keep up. That's the benefit of watching the classes on Michael's YouTube channel. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply the yellow to all of the petals. I'm going to try and leave a little bit of negative space on each petal. If you have a hard time doing that, you can use the masking fluid trick I shared. But I generally like to start at the top of the petals, just sort of bring it down one side, maybe do a stroke through the middle, and then another stroke on the other side. And that allows for easy negative space. Sometimes you can only get one on each side and not one through the middle, or sometimes you can even get two through the middle, whatever you need. But I kind of just do those long curvy strokes, and that kind of helps me achieve a little bit of negative space. And it's okay if some of the brown from the center bleeds into the yellow. That's just going to add to the abstract look. That's okay. But I'm starting with the main front facing one because that's the one I started with for the center. So I know that this is more dry than this one. If you want a really wet look, then you would maybe do the center of this one and then immediately do the petals. But I don't like too much of a bleeding into each other look for these because they already look loose enough. But a little bit is nice. All right, for the other one, we're going to apply it to the petals, but just remember those three little ones middle are actually leaves, not petals. So if you apply yellow to them, it's not a big deal. Green is made by mixing yellow and blue, so you can still go over them with green. That's the beauty of flowers, is generally they're all very complementary palettes or analogous palettes, really. All right. And then after you've applied yellow to your petals, we're ready for the leaves and the stems. But we're going to start with the stems and the three little leaves that are on the side facing black-eyed season. So I'm actually going to start with those little leaves. I'm going to use the Sap Green, and I'm just going to loosely cover those leaves just like I did the petals. And then for the stem that protrudes from the side facing black-eyed season, I'm going to apply it to the stem all the way to where the two stems intersect. So right where it kind of creates that X. So right above that one petal on the front facing black-eyed season, and then just below that petal all the way to where the two stems intersect. And I am going to use just the tip of my brush to try and create a thinner stem. And then I'm going to not apply any paint yet to the rest of that stem. I'm actually going to move to the top part of the other stem with the green that's still in my brush, just to create a little bit of color transition and movement in this piece. I'm just going to, with the green on my brush, dip the very tip into brown and apply that to the top half. So where that X is created all the way up to the flower with my brush. And it should be like a brownish green. Sometimes it ends up looking very brown, and that's okay. This is supposed to be loose. And then I just blotted my brush a couple times to remove excess brown, but I'm not cleaning it. I'm going to dip it back into the green, and I'm going to apply that to what's left of both stems. And we should get some bleeding with the brown into the green, and that's what I want. And you can even sort of manipulate it by going back over the top part of the one stem if you need to. But this just creates a little bit of movement and texture. And then we'll be ready for the leaves. So I will go ahead and clean my brush now. The leaves are going to be a combination of the green predominantly, but also a little bit of yellow, a little bit of brown, and a little bit of blue, because all those colors work really nicely together. Blue and yellow create green. Adding yellow to green makes it yellow green. Adding blue to green makes it blue green. So they all work together based on color theory. So I'll start with this little one down here. And I'm going to apply the Sap Green to the very top half. So that little stem, as well as the top half of this leaf. I'm not going to clean my brush. I'll just dip it in the yellow and apply that to the bottom. So it should be like more of a yellow green on bottom and sort of a blue green on top. If you need to make adjustments by adding more green on the top, you can, but it'll create like a nice transition of the two colors. And we're going to do the same sort of thing to the very bottom left leaf. I'm going to apply green to the top half. Green to the top half, and then tip of the brush into the brown and apply that to the bottom half. And then again, you can always add a little more green, drop that in, make some adjustments if you need to. But as the paint dries, they'll kind of marry and mingle and flow into each other in a really pleasing manner. And because I use brown, I am quickly cleaning and blotting my brush. Now for last one. This time I'll apply green on the bottom half. I've been doing the top half. This time I'm going to do the bottom half. Bottom half for the very top left leaf. And then I'm going to wipe my brush over the ultramarine blue for just a second, and apply that along the top half. And that'll create a bit of a blue-green, which will be a nice interest color. So our leaves will all look green when they're done, but there'll be a little bit of movement because we added in some other quick little colors. And then all that's left for this is really a quick piece. All we need to do now to make them look like prairie, sunset, black-eyed seasons. You can just leave them yellow if you want. But if you look at mine here, I have orange on maybe the bottom third of each petal. So I'm going to use that yellow-orange color And every single petal, I'm just going to apply some hatching strokes. I'm going to try and make them all the same size on each flower, so it looks like a ring of orange around the flower. But I'm just doing 2 to 3 hatching strokes on each leaf to add that little bit of orange to it. And then that's it, you're done. Not too bad, right? You can whip out a lot of these very quickly. Especially once you get the hang of the process. It's very, very quick. And I'm also trying to work around any negative space that was created where I didn't apply anything over the wet paint. So you can finish up if you want, because you still have time, because I'm going to talk about drying, finishing your artwork, how to protect it. So I'm going to get going on that. So this is wet right now, so I wouldn't want to erase any graphite lines that are visible. I wouldn't want to yet remove the masking fluid I put on. So you can either let it air dry. I would let it air dry for at least a half an hour. An hour would be ideal. But because this is a live class, I'm going to use a heat gun to do that. You can also use a hair dryer. And so I'm just going to turn it on. It's a little loud, but I'm going to just run it over the painting to let the paint dry. We'll give it a second here. And because this isn't a piece I'm going to sell, I'll just sort of dab at it to see if it's dry, but I don't recommend you do that in real life. Okay, hopefully that's good enough for the purposes of this class. I'd probably go longer than that if I were painting this, you know, for a friend or for to sell at the market. So, you know, I use the darker graphite lines here, and you can really see them underneath the paint. Those are going to be very hard to lift with an eraser. I also pressed hard with it so you can see them better at home. So I'm really not even going to try. I'm just going to lift a little bit where it's outside of the paint, because that'll be a lot easier to lift than what's underneath the paint. So I really do recommend you use an H pencil if you can. The higher the number, the better. You'll really notice the difference. Like this, I didn't erase the graphite lines at all. And can you really even see them? Because this is made with like a 9H pencil. So I didn't even have to erase the graphite lines. They're so hidden underneath the paint. Whereas this one, you can really see them. But you can erase any visible graphite lines. You can remove the masking fluid. I'll also show you on our little sample one here. So I use a paper towel. Usually you can use your fingers too, but you might, the oil on your fingers might damage the paper, or they might be dirty. You don't even realize it, and that might dirty your paper. So I like to use clean paper towels. And the colorless masking fluid comes off, and look how crisp and clean that is. Same thing with the art masking fluid. It'll come up nice and crisp and clean where we applied it. Permanent masking fluid, I can wipe, and it's not going to lift because it's permanent. It's wax-based, not latex-based. Now for this piece, I applied some to the leaves. So I'll lift it, and you can see wherever I applied it, it leaves some negative space. And I wasn't very careful with it, but if you really took your time, you can make the negative space on the leaves look more like what they do just organically or naturally, like I did on the centers and petals. So as you get practice with just naturally creating negative space, you can totally use masking fluid to do it, and you will fool everyone. All right. The last thing I recommend is you are an artist, whether you're a beginner or you're seasoned, you're an artist. And because you're an artist, I think you should sign your name to your artwork. So I do have a Winsor & Newton marker here. This is a 1.0, and I'm just going to sign my name. So that's one way I like to finish my artwork, is by signing it. And then I'm going to talk about protection. So to the best of my knowledge, Michaels and Winsor & Newton does not have any products that you could spray on or spread on through varnish that would work well with watercolor, because you have to remember watercolor is a water soluble medium. So if you use anything to try and protect it that has water in it, well, it could cause the watercolor paint to reactivate and smear. So If you do find a spray, aerosol, fixative, or varnish, or a wax varnish, or some kind of top coat that says it's suitable for watercolor, I would first test it on just a scrap piece with some watercolor paint on it, just to make sure it doesn't cause anything to smear or bleed or reactivate. I'll be honest with you, I use varnishes on just about every other media I use, but I do not use it for watercolor. I just leave it as is. What I do to protect it is one of two things. I frame it, or if I'm not immediately going to frame it, I will put it in a self-adhesive clear bag like this, and then file it away in a cabinet. So this is a hibiscus that I taught last year, I think, for Winsor and Newton. This is the original. This was the one that was demoed in the class. And so I have it in a clear bag that is self-adhesive. And I also put some backing board with it to just make it more rigid so it can't fold or bend. And they're in a file cabinet to keep it safe and protected. But as far as framing goes, I do have this here. This is another Black Eyed Susan painting I did that is in a frame. This is just a Michaels frame from their store. And this is just normal glass. So you can already see some reflections even just under the camera. Let me turn this ring light off. So, well, you can still see it, so it didn't help. What you can do, you can buy a frame off the shelves, and then you can go to the framing department and ask them to replace the glass with something else. I've done that at Michaels, so you can totally do that. Michaels, one thing I'd recommend, because this is student grade paint, the light fast ratings may not be as good as professional paints, where light fast is really important for artists. And what I mean by light fast is the pigment's resistance to UV rays. So everything, if you think of old master paintings, even Van Gogh, like some of the paint, well, all the paintings that he painted, they're not as vibrant and vivid now as they were when he first painted them, because the colors have sort of faded over the years. So even light fast pigments will fade. It just takes longer for them to fade than non-light fast pigments. So with everything, even if I know I'm using something that has an excellent light fast rating, I put them under UV glass. So Michaels has regular glass like this, the kind that can break or shatter, that is 99% UV protection. That's their conservation clear glass. They also have a conservation masterpiece glass that has the 99% UV protection, but it also has reduced reflection. So if you hate the reflection, you can pay a little bit extra and get the masterpiece that has the UV protection and the reduced reflection. But what I'm going to recommend is plexiglass or acrylic glazing. It's what I use for all of my colored pencil artwork, because if something falls off the wall and breaks, only the frame's going to break, not the glazing, because it's plexiglass or it's acrylic glazing. It's not going to break. So you're not going to damage your artwork, even if a frame falls off the wall. And because I enter artwork into exhibitions and things during shipment, I don't have to worry about the glass breaking if I use plexiglass. And so Michaels has 2 tiers for their plexiglass as well. They have the conservation clear that is shatterproof, 99% UV protecting and with a reflection, or you can get their masterpiece one that also has reduced reflection, but is still shatterproof, still has 99% UV protection. So I think that about covers it. Let me show you a couple other frame options. I really like the natural wood option here. This is 11 by 14 with an 8 by 10 mat. The mat came with the frame. All I had to do was pop in my artwork, and you can use linen tape to affix your artwork to your mat board. That's what a lot of artists will do with their exhibition work, because it comes off very cleanly off the paper. Because this isn't, I wouldn't call this exhibition worthy, I just use painter's tape to affix it to the mat board. But you can use painter's tape, you can use the fine art linen tape, whatever you want to kind of tape this to the mat board. This is an idea. This is a float frame. Now this one's 8 by 10 in size, so it's the exact size of the artwork, so it wouldn't look like it's floating, but you could get a larger size and then you'll have a clear border around it if you wanted. And this is from Michaels too. And then I always like the kind of white on white look, and this one also is 11 by 14 with an 8 by 10 mat, and you can just pop that in there. And I like the white on white look. I think that looks really clean, crisp, and nice as well. All right, so with that in mind, it's 3:02. Are there any questions, Tim? If not, I'd love to see your Black Eyed Susans if you were able to paint along with me. I'll switch to gallery view here. Ooh, gorgeous. Lovely, lovely. They look so loose and pretty. I think it's always nice when you can work with a very limited palette. Wow, some of these look so lifelike from my vantage point. Amazing. I didn't have my little card up today just because there wasn't room, but y'all can go to my website. It's just my name, mandypeltier.com, and you can email me from there. I'd love to see your artwork, you know, bigger, because I just see little thumbnails of it. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. My handle is Mandy Peltier Artist, but you can find that if you just go to my website. There's links to it from my website, mandypeltier.com. But I am so proud of all of you. You did an amazing job. Some of these, wow, the transition of color is just gorgeous. You always impress me. Always impress me. So I think we're good. Thank you so much for being here today. I do hope you learned a lot. I hope I answered some of the questions you may have had, or even just some confusion between what's the difference between this and that, or when would I use this and when would I use that. So it was wonderful being with you all today.